You can't mitigate for everything. You can't have a plan B for everything. But I think understanding where those key points of failure are.
One that's never changed is the importance of robust forecasting.
Holding adequate stock at hand, having alternative suppliers.
Be patient with your suppliers, particularly these times. It's been very difficult for people to get product.
Hello, welcome back to the advisory deck. It's Troy Forrest from Strategy Road and James McGill from Chatham Capital. How are you, James?
Hey, Troy, I'm good, thank you.
Very good. Today, we thought we'd have a conversation to try and add some value to leaders and owners of smaller and mid-sized businesses, and indeed even larger organisations, around a business topic that we know, out of the advisory deck, is being dealt with and challenging a whole lot of organisations right now, and that is supply chain difficulties. In this interesting moment in time that we're living through, we're seeing all kinds of organisations and industries struggling with what they might have taken for granted, the access to products, to services, to technology that allow them to get their value proposition out to their customers. For one reason or another, they're in dire straits at the moment. And so if it is a topic that's being dealt with or navigated, how do we deal with it better in the future? What sort of things should we be thinking about and dealing with and having a conversation about at the strategic planning level when it comes to supply chain difficulties? Common, right? We're seeing in a lot of spaces, from ag chem to medical supplies, PPE, hand sanitizer, all sorts of stuff, right?
Absolutely, and it's topical now because of COVID. We're sitting here and international travel is difficult, freight is difficult. The reality is, once, and let's hope COVID gets sorted and there's a vaccine and everything goes back to normal, whatever that might be, the trade wars now that are building between the US and China, that are bringing Australia into those discussions, it starts with our resources, but has the potential to impact our imports as well, means that when you're sitting around the table thinking about your business model, and your business model about how you make money and where you connect your suppliers with your customers, we often talk about at strategy days about your what if scenario planning and so forth, and people go, what if this, and it becomes a 5-minute conversation, and then you move on to the other things that are the new and exciting, and if you forget about this,
someone else, yeah.
Absolutely. And I think the reality now is that for companies that are reliant on a supply chain, and most companies are realistically, but especially supply chains that are unfortunately now even interstate. If you're sitting around the country currently, this situation that the Victoria's in, sadly, it's going to get harder and harder to get supplies into or out of Victoria. It's even harder to get supplies in and out of Australia. So I think the discussion point should be, more time should be spent by executives, owners, whoever it might be, really thinking about your supply chain and understanding at a high level who's involved and where those points of failure are. And you can't insure for everything. You can't mitigate for everything. You can't have a plan B for everything. But I think understanding where those key points of failure are, and at least thinking, if something does fail, what could we do? And that might be as simple as, if we have a point of failure, how quickly do we get a team together? A bit like disaster recovery sort of activities. How quickly do we get a team together? What's the process we go through? How long can we continue on with our current business if we have a failure somewhere? Is it 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months? And use that thinking and analysis to figure out, where do we spend time to make sure if there's a breakage, we can resolve it. So I think that's the discussion which is more prevalent now than it was 12 months ago. But I think will feature much more heavily in strategic planning sessions over the next 12 to 18 months, because as we sit here now, the world is changing, and supply chains are probably the most obvious business impact that we're seeing, because they are breaking all around us.
Pressure testing, we're forced to pressure test and hypothetical out different scenarios because we're seeing them play out before our very eyes. And in a world where we've been thinking about, well, no matter where we are on the supply chain, how do we stay closer to the customer? Now we've got a moment in time where some of those at the sort of the manufacturing end of things just physically do not have the ability to get what they need to the end user customer. So what role do the intermediaries in the supply chain play during that period? And as we're going about mapping out a more robust, or, well, at least we've had the conversation and we've thought through some of these scenarios, who are you having around the table to include in that discussion? Is it just your supply chain manager and your MD and your CEO and your BDM, or is it bringing key customers into the conversation? Really thinking about if the choke point to us getting our value proposition crystallised with our clients and getting paid for that is access to products and services, how are we going about mitigating that? And it comes at an interesting time when we are thinking more about buy local as well, right?
Spot on.
So we're being forced to do that. Well, look, we could riff on this for a little while, but we've actually thought this was a really good one to throw to a couple of subject matter experts who are in and around this space, thinking about what you should be considering when it comes to supply chain robustness and risk mitigation and protection in the years ahead. Let's throw to them.
G'day Troy, James. Been lucky enough, I guess, over my time to work on both sides of the supply chain, i.e. in the supplier, multinational business level, out to distribution customers and now in the distribution network myself. So a couple of the key things from my side, one that's never changed is the importance of robust forecasting. Some suppliers don't put a lot of weight on it. I know that, again, on both sides of the fence, I always have, and it holds you in good stead no matter what the year does. Allows you to get yourself to the top of the queue. If things do get tight and you've got that security of numbers with a supplier, it makes it very difficult to jump up and down if someone meets your forecast. And we all like upsides, but it's not always possible. The other watch out for me would be how you're able to manage both working capital and cash flow. And what that obviously drives is flexibility. That's become more pertinent in our marketplace, being able to take advantage of opportunities, I guess, outside of traditional supply times. We've seen a real shift in the market over the last 15 years where the responsibility has gone or moved from the supplier, taking all the risk, having product there when you want it, which is a great luxury. That's moved on to sharing that load with distribution, where the risk is shared across the two. And equally, as things have evolved and markets have been squeezed, we then turn around and need to share that responsibility with the growers, with the clients. To do that, you need to have those really good relationships. In fact, I'd argue you need partnerships with your suppliers, partnerships that allow you to manipulate deals that work for everyone, right through from supplier to us to the growers, taking opportunities out to growers. You need support to do that, often from suppliers, to make that a reality, just to ensure that we're actually protecting clients, that they can access what they need when they need it in this ever-changing environment, as if farming's not hard enough, relying on the weather. We just experienced a really interesting period, obviously, with COVID, and I would say the Australian network in the ag supply business has done a fantastic job to react as best they could under really trying circumstances. So holding those relationships and partnerships, as I said, really close with your key suppliers, spending time on forecasts where they hold weight. There's no point spending that time if equally the suppliers don't value them, but in my experience that's certainly something that can work exceptionally well. And trying to remain as flexible as you can, whether that's lining up with a number of suppliers, etc. But having those discussions with those you partner with around what things they can do to make that flexibility more relevant for you and for your customers. So really interesting space, and one that I think will continue to change. With the advent of, as we're seeing at the minute in retail, with online click and collect. Really something that has a future. I know it's something we've embarked on personally, a click and collect process to allow people to access us 24/7 when it works for them and give them that convenience.
It's Peter Alderson, Shield Insurance Brokers in Adelaide. I just want to have a quick talk today about supply chain issues and what we can do with that situation and insurance. As with every insurance, there is some things we can insure and some things we can't. So I'll really focus today on things that we can insure. Very topical at the moment, COVID. Yeah, that's a very difficult one, and it's my opinion that we probably can't get much in the way of insurance to do with supply chain disruption due to COVID. What we can do though is we can look at business interruption cover for your business that can assist with supply chain disruption, in particular with suppliers and customers premises in particular. Now, business interruption covers material loss or damage that affects gross profit. What we can do is make sure that your policy has an extension on it for suppliers and customers premises, and that would mean if that supplier or customer's premises sustained a material damage event such as a fire, water damage, earthquake, malicious damage, impact, anything like that that was insured under the policy, and that affected your revenue, we can insure that. The policy covers loss of gross profit for a predetermined period. Now, the automatic benefits under a policy for customers or suppliers premises is limited, so we need to check on your alliance and how much that could affect your gross profit. However, those limits can be extended with individual consideration from an insurer. When we think of supply chain, we can also think of your IT dependency and your connectivity. For interruptions there due to a cyber event, we need a cyber insurance policy. Now, they will cover, in general, loss of gross profit as well. So if you're relying on an IT supplier or connectivity, very important to consider. In addition to this, we can implement normal risk management process, things such as holding adequate stock at hand, having alternative suppliers. All of these things can assist in the event of supply chain disruption.
G'day everybody, Dan Eggleton here, Vinous Consulting. Talking to you from the beautiful sunny Barossa Valley. Absolutely fantastic here. As you can hear the coins coming down on the roof of my house. It's one of those things where you look at supply and demand and supply chain and how you can get guarantee of supply. Well, the one thing we haven't been able to get guarantee of for the last 3 to 4 years is exactly this, rain. So there are a number of factors outside of your own control. The best advice I can give in coming from a winemaker's perspective and from somebody who has to be on the ball all the time and trying to make things work from a various ranges of suppliers is to be patient, be very clear with what you need to see, what you're trying to achieve and what your client or your product actually needs. Be patient with your suppliers, particularly these times. It's been very difficult for people to get product through the COVID period, but in the last 2 to 3 years, as the downturn of manufacturing in Australia has occurred, there's also been issues with raw supply and other factors. So being patient with that, making sure you give yourself options and be flexible to a certain extent, being able to adapt and work with your suppliers to meet your demands is one of the primary objectives. But at the end of the day, having good communications is the key. And with that might actually buy you extended terms. It might aid what you're trying to do for your client or your supply end market. And at the end of the day, you'll be able to deliver better service, but also be respected from both sides of the business. But I hope this has given a bit of insight. yeah, let it keep raining. It's been very nice. And with all luck, we'll have a good vintage in 2021. We'll all be COVID free. We'll all be back eating and drinking and doing what we need to, but probably with a slightly different perspective on life, I should imagine. Anyway, take it easy. We'll talk soon. Cheers.
Fantastic insights. Thank you so much for those. Look, again, we talked about this is a topic that is no industry, no market sector is immune from some of the pressures, and that's been realised right now. So key things for you, James, when you say, okay, you're the senior leadership team, you're sitting around the table, you're confronting some supply chain challenges, but we've got to design the organisation for tomorrow that can deal with these sort of things in a volatile world in a better way. What comes to mind for you?
A couple of key things. One, make sure that your what-if analysis is really, really strong, and be serious about what if this supply chain breaks somewhere, and the plans of how you're going to deal with those breakages. And the other one, which is, I speak to a number of clients who have said, they had an issue somewhere in their supply chain or in their business, and if it wasn't for the partners that formed that supply chain, who took some risk to help them get around those issues, they would have gone out of business. So I think it's one thing saying you've got a supply chain, it's two, are the people, the companies in that supply chain, those you can actually rely on when something doesn't go to plan? Will they help you through, or will they cut you off at the knees? And it's really, really hard to figure that out sometimes until you're in that situation. But that's beyond what a contract says. That's about strong relationships, aligned values, being credible and being open and honest, and I think that forms part of your supply chain strategy as well.
I think, thinking more around the agility of, I don't even think of it as a supply chain tomorrow, I think it's a supply ecosystem. I think it's what do we need to have around us as an organisation that gives us flexibility and protects us from things that will inevitably go wrong. Who do we need in the conversation to help us inform our decision making in the years ahead? Look, it's a fascinating, challenging conversation to have, but it's such an important one strategically for every organisation. If you want to come and have a riff on the advisory deck with us, or have us come into your organisation, have that kind of a conversation, get in touch. Details down the bottom. We talk about all kinds of things, large and small, on the advisory deck, James. So we'd love to chat with you. As always, thank you so much for your contribution.
Thank you.
See you next time on the advisory deck.